What does it feel like to take acid? Now, this is kind of a difficult question to answer, because for those of you that have taken psychedelics before, you'll know that the psychedelic experience is kind of beyond that which we have words for. However, I'm going to do my best fucking attempt at relaying the experience to those of you that have no clue. Before we get started, I need to say that this video exists only for education and harm reduction purposes. In no way do I condone or encourage the use of any scheduled substance. Also, everything in this video is going to be from my personal perspective. So if you have had an experience with LSD that does not match up with what I describe, well, that's fine, because everyone is going to be affected by psychedelics differently. Now, with all that out of the way, let's begin. So you take your little square of blotter paper and place it on your tongue, and then you just press it to the roof of your mouth and suck on it for a while. This is the way I was taught to do it, and it's the way I've always been doing it. It's never failed me. So you suck on it for like 5, maybe 10 minutes. The longer the better, obviously. And then once that paper is kind of, all gummed up and real mushy, you can just swallow it. It's paper. It's not going to hurt you. It's a very small amount of paper. And there's still going to be a little bit of acid left on there that you'll digest in your tummy. So you eat it, and then you wait, in my experience, over an hour. Now, the time frame is like anywhere from like 30 minutes to maybe like 90 minutes. However, with me, I just know that acid always takes over an hour to hit. Now, granted, at the 1 hour mark, I will start to feel some effects kind of showing up. And the way that those effects will present themselves is really kind of an elevated feeling. Not really high, but just an increased mood. I will feel kind of a little bit lighter, and I'll start to feel a little bit of flushing, especially in like my face, and that's how I know that the effects are starting to set in. Now, once they have, fully begun to make their way not only into my brain but then into my perception, the 3 things that I notice are a taste, a very distinct, almost metallic taste, but I could more accurately describe it as purifying. It's kind of like if you took water and put it through a Brita filter and then took that filtered water and put it back through the Brita filter twice. That's what it tastes like. So a very pure kind of taste to it. And then the second thing that I'll notice is almost always my first visual affect is tracers or after images. So if you take your hand right now, looking at your screen or whatever, and you just pass it in front of your face, you'll notice that it leaves kind of a motion blur. That, your eyes can't quite pick up on it all at once, so it leaves behind. I just looked at my hand there. I don't know why I did that. I'm not high. Now, on psychedelics, that blur becomes a lot more intense and lasts a lot longer, so you can really start drawing out like shapes in your field of vision with your hands, because they'll leave an after image or a tracer for quite a while, and it will be, pretty pronounced and obvious. That's the second thing that I notice when acid is starting to work its way into my perception. The last and third thing that I notice is breathing. So not like my breathing. I mean, yeah, my breathing is affected. Not like it's labored or anything, but when the acid starts to kick in, I'll breathe and I can feel the oxygen fill me up, especially in my chest. It'll really fill my chest up, and I can feel like all of the fresh air coming in, and it's very calming and soothing, at least for me. But that's not the breathing I'm talking about. The breathing I'm talking about is with particularly walls, ceilings, and floors, so large, flat surfaces. And if you're particularly close to that surface, you'll notice that it looks like the whole thing is kind of breathing, Like if you right, your chest kind of comes out when you inhale, and then it goes back in when you exhale. That's what the walls and the ceiling and the floor will kind of look like. But it'll be very subtle. It won't be like the whole wall is coming in on you. I mean, that probably happens if you take a lot of acid, but those are the 3 things that I notice and will tell me that the acid experience has begun, and it's time to just ride this wave out and enjoy it. So now that the acid has made its way into my system and the trip is beginning, the next thing that happens is patterns. Patterns are probably the most interesting visual that you get on LSD. And it's very, how do I put this? I could probably find like a GIF or something to put like there, but in the event that I don't find anything, the way that I would describe the patterns that you see on acid are very geometric. well, probably not as geometric as DMT, but they're geometric as opposed to like mushrooms, which is a lot more organic patterns. At any rate, if you look at, I don't know, let me find an example. This is perfect. This is a Bluetooth speaker. If you'll notice, it's very textured. If you don't know what the speaker is, the JBL Charge 3. So if you have one, you can look at it for yourself. Otherwise, the outside of this is very textured. It's got like almost a fabric to it. And if you're looking at that when you're on acid, all of the individual little dots of the fabric will kind of like bubble and dance around, or like they'll be moving in ways that are like tessellating. I'm looking way too intently at that. Again, not high, just kind of fucked in the head. But the patterns that are already present in objects that you look at are going to start to kind of come alive and almost dance. Now, if you're looking at something with a lot of striations, like wood grain, those grains of wood and the patterns in that wood are going to start moving upwards, downwards, left, right, doesn't matter. They're going to start moving, but when you take a second look at it, it won't have gone anywhere. So like you could watch as the grain kind of moves across the wood and then go back to that spot at the beginning, and the grain's still there, but it's moving. So it's like an infinite like tessellation of that pattern through the object that you're looking at. Another thing with patterns in acid is that it will bring patterns out of places that you never previously considered. I mean, you could be looking at a perfectly benign object that you've seen a million times in your sober life, like a tomato, right? You know, tomatoes are pretty boring. But like on acid, you could just stare at that thing for fucking, minutes. To you, it would probably feel like hours, but, minutes, and just be very intently focused on that object because there's so much going on in it you've never seen before. Okay, so enough about pretty patterns on acid. Let's talk about some of the emotional and mental effects that LSD is going to give you. One of the most obvious feelings that you're going to get while on acid, and this is assuming you're having a good trip, is an intense feeling of euphoria. Now, granted, this happens after a couple hours into the trip and can last, hopefully, for the entirety of the trip. You are going to feel fantastic. I mean, assuming you've never felt a true sense of euphoria in your life before, this will be the best you've ever fucking felt. You're going to be very elevated in mood. You're going to feel light, almost floating on your feet, and you'll just be happy. I mean, giggly even. One of the most common things that happens to people on acid is they will just laugh for no fucking reason because your body just doesn't know what to do with these emotions that you're feeling, and the only way to really express it outward and, feel even better about it is to laugh. Coupled with that elevated mood and, an almost psychopathic level of just laughing for no reason, is you're going to feel like you just need to move around. Your limbs are going to feel very fluid, and you're going to want to just be up and about. So this is where music really does come in handy. So if you're listening to music, you can dance around to the music, and that is going to feel perfect because your body just wants to be active and expending all of this energy that it now has. Or, even if you just get up and walk around. You can walk around your house if there's a park nearby, assuming there aren't too many people, because being around sober people, at least sober people that don't know you're high while you're high, can be interesting. Now, I've done it on accident. A couple of friends and I, we went out and there were like some sober people around. Just be friendly, don't talk to them too much because you might end up saying something that they'll be like, this dude fucking tripping, like assuming they know what tripping is. Some people don't. But go somewhere with like not too many people and walk around and just kind of enjoy being out and about and just, kind of moving through reality. It's going to really elevate and keep your trip positive. So now you've been tripping for a while. Let's say it's somewhere around like 6 hours. You've seen a bunch of beautiful patterns. You've felt the feeling of euphoria, and you've been moving around. At this point, you will probably be nearing the climax or the peak of your trip. And what the peak feels like is, well, almost exactly as it sounds. It is the highest, most intense point of your trip. And everything up until now has been leading up to there. It is intense. I don't have the vocabulary to explain the intensity of an acid peak, because it is just, everything you felt up to that point, all at the same time, and then some extra. It will be insane visual affects. Granted, you're not going to see dragons flying across the sky unless you took like a shit ton of acid, and even then I'm not sure that like dragons actually happen on acid. That might be more of a mushroom thing. At any rate, the visuals are going to be so intense and so encompassing of everything that you see that you may actually end up seeing things that aren't there. You will be experiencing the most intense emotions and seeing the most intense visuals that you ever fucking have, which is why it's important to be mindful of your set and your setting, because everything around you is going to get heightened to such a degree that if there's anything negative, that is what is going to control your peak. So you want to make sure that you have, comfort around you, positive music on, because music on LSD, crazy. I can't even, voices come in and out, and you can hyper focus on an instrument and hear only that and nothing else from the fucking audio. And I have even listened to songs after a trip that I listened to while I was tripping, and I will notice those things again that I had no idea were even in the fucking song. So definitely put some music on while you're tripping. One of the last things that will happen during your trip, and it can be at any point, it's not just going to be at the peak, after the peak, or before the peak, are thought loops. And these are really just having the same thought over and over and over. And it's not always obvious that you're stuck in a thought loop, and you might not notice it until about the third or the fourth or the fifth loop. But the best way I can explain this is you'll perform the same actions multiple times in a row, or you will come to the same sort of eureka revelations multiple times in a row, but from different angles. And only after several times of doing this will you go, hey, wait a minute, I've been doing this for a while. Maybe it's time to go look at something else and change my setting, assuming you're in that state and you can, kind of rationalize that. You might not be able to, because that's kind of what acid does to you. But thought loops can be really positive or really negative. If you're in and having a thought loop that is kind of a eureka, oh my god, this moment, then it's great to have that multiple times, because you'll keep getting your mind fucking blown. I mean, literally fucking rocketed out of the back of your skull if it's a truly profound, revelation that you're having. However, if it's a bad thing and you're having that thought loop multiple times, then you're just fucking spiraling downward to the abyss. So that's why it's great to have a sitter nearby, because they will be able to tell just from your facial expressions alone whether or not you are having a positive or a negative thought loop. And if you're having a negative thought loop, hopefully they're a good enough sitter to, move you out of that setting and get your thought loop back to somewhere positive. Okay, so the next part that I'm going to talk about is the come down and then the afterglow. But before I mention that, there's this very common thought that almost everyone has on acid. I had myself the first time I took it, is that how do I go back to reality after experiencing this, after having all of this knowledge just mainlined into my brain? And how do I go back to normal sober reality and interact with people that have never taken acid before, having experienced all of this? And I want to let you know that you'll be fine. You will go back to your sober self and you will be perfectly fine. Of course, you will have had revelations, but those revelations will be, personal to you. You will be able to go back to interacting with reality in the exact same way that you did previously, assuming you want to. But you're not going to have a hard time interacting with people after the acid trip, and the trip is going to end. Okay, so you've been tripping for anywhere between 8 to 12 hours, and you're finally on the come down. You've experienced the peak of the trip, and it will be pretty obvious to you, and then it's going to have a pretty sharp drop off. The come up is a lot longer than the come down, so it's not going to be harsh or anything. Acid is going to bring you down very comfortably, but it's going to take less time. So the come down is really just taking that peak, that absolute best part of the trip, and slowly working you down back to baseline. You're going to feel your energy levels start to subside. And if you're listening to music, you might notice the low tones a lot more, like a ew. It's going to feel just like a decreasing octave for the next hour, even if you aren't hearing a decreasing octave. And you're just going to, kind of be powering down. The visuals are going to start fading away. That sense of euphoria and all that energy is going to kind of fade. And then for me, after the come down ends, I am always left with afterglow and that purifying taste that I talked about at the beginning. That purifying taste for me lasts for several hours after the trip, and sometimes I'll even feel it the next day, unless I ate a whole bunch, But the afterglow is kind of hard to describe, because you're not tripping, but you still kind of feel elevated. You feel kind of purified, and you'll feel as though you're moving through reality much much more silkily. Is that a real word? It's got to be a real word, right? Your movements will seem kind of, more fluid. You'll still have a little bit of that upbeat energy to yourself. Granted, nowhere near as intense as with the actual trip of LSD, but you'll still feel kind of upbeat and positive. So that's it. That is the LSD experience as seen through my eyes. If you have a different experience with LSD, or you know people that describe a different experience with LSD, I'd love to hear about it, because acid is an extremely individual experience, so we're all going to have, kind of different experiences of it. At any rate, that's all for this video. If you liked what I had to say, if you want to see more of it, all the buttons. They've been around. It's YouTube. This isn't fucking news to anyone. So just go ahead and do whatever you feel like doing, but it does really help me out, a lot. So I strongly encourage it. At any rate, I will see you in the next one. Peace.